in Edmonton that actually raided and actually arrested people. And from that perspective, we were talking about, as well, we had another article here around how groups had to come together in order to march in Toronto and be safe. And one of the other articles was talking about how, even though that there's been lots of issues, we continue to fight change and move forward, because there's still, we see in the 1800s people who have been arrested, but today we still have these laws on the books that help us progress forward. And even though it's a long battle, we have made small strides and continue to work together. And there's lots of great examples around the table. Yes? Yeah.
When did they have that federal law again decriminalizing?
So in '67, there was a bill presented to reform the criminal code to around social issues such as homosexuality, abortion, and contraception. And then officially in '68, homosexuality was decriminalized, and in '69, Canada, because of all of the amendments take a while, it was officially on the books as decriminalized. So it was like a 2-year process to get the criminal code changed and actually passed, where I was sent through, well, it would have been England at that time, not Canada, because we still had the repatriated constitution.
Yeah, I think in terms of like the bureaucracy that was involved in terms of like that quote unquote 2-year process, right? Because not long after that, in 1981, when Pisces Health Spa happened, the Pisces Health bathrooms happened, it's like, if they have Stonewall in New York, we have the Pisces Health Spa in Edmonton. And I think that it is important for us to ground ourselves in that, in the sense of, there's a lot of like helplessness right now in the community, what can we do? But if we really put that, ground that concretely, this is within someone's lifetime. Someone was there who witnessed everything that day. Someone who, what, they're like 40, so calculate the math, but I think something important to highlight is that someone infiltrated from the morality control unit, as they called it, infiltrated and then framed people to say that, oh, they performed acts of fellatio and anal intercourse between males. And then here they also say that there was no evidence to suggest prostitutes were working in the spa. That goes hand in hand with what happened in Stonewall. Who was it on the streets that was fighting? Was it not sex workers? And I think that if the Pisces Health Spa happened today in Edmonton, who would they be rated? They can't tell you it's illegal to be gay because of immorality, but then they'll tell you if you're working under the table. If you're a sex worker, they'll still get at you for it. And I think it's important to say that, because Somi and I were talking earlier, like AUP is good friends with Migrante. There's a lot of people in the AUPE that aren't migrants, but yet they show up concretely and show material support and are there for migrants. There's queer and trans people in all of our organizations, you know, in our workplaces, in the streets, in indigenous, like all across the board. But it's like, I have a lot more in common with someone who is straight and has showed up concretely to push policy for queer and trans rights than a gay cop who will pin my people down when push comes to shove.
And on top of that, one of the articles talked about the intersectionality that we often forget about, that sometimes we get pigeonholed into having to identify as one section, but we may be several different things, and as a result, we need to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry, one last point.
We have to, don't worry. We're waiting for lunch, don't worry.
Sorry to bring it to life, but I think it's important for talking history today, is that when Pride was stopped years ago, who were the people that had issues with that? Who were the ones benefiting from the fact that it kept going? Who were the people on the ground saying, you need to pay attention to this, and these people weren't listening because they want to keep the party going? And so like when we say that Pride is a protest, it's not to take away from the fact that we've had our winter successes. It is more important now than ever to honor those winter successes so that we keep that momentum going, right? So across that, it's like people showing up, like the nurses, for all of these youth that are losing access to education. It's the migrants across the border. It's black people facing police brutality in the streets. Same thing with indigenous people. And I think it's establishing that basis of unity, and for us, not just like as a community being like what's next for us, but also like how can you also show up across the board for other people that may or may not share those identities. I think that like if we organize this thing, it has to go beyond what you might imagine is possible to do.
What law enforcement did, this morality kind of policing, the law that they used to attack queer and trans people was public indecency. That's what they would charge people with. So while homosexuality was decriminalized, it was decriminalized in your private bedroom that you had to hide and still be closeted. And they used public indecency to do bathhouse raids, to attack people in the street if they, like even if two queer people held hands, they would call that public indecency. And that law still is in the criminal code, and it's not defined. So law enforcement can interpret public indecency however they choose. And when we have current governments that are emboldened to attack people, we need to be aware of like that history. And I know everyone in the room is, so but it's just that when I learned that, it just really stuck with me. And that the way that laws can be changed, but then they just find another way to subvert and attack.
A piece of a country, maybe some of you have never been in, right? A country that this is not history, this is reality, right? People can't hold hands in the streets. People are attacked, anytime. Some of us are displaced, right? Forced into asylum seeking, right? To find safety, right? So this piece is reality, right? And what I'm just to echo about, we talked about something which is so hot, so I think when we go into it, everyone is going to get involved. But I wanted to talk about the piece that I saw here about relationship, right? How dating in those days, how it was illegal and, punishable by penalty. I want you to reflect, this is reality and it's still reality here, right? It's just a different layer of it or how people see it. But trans people, specifically, trans and non-binary people, we have people that we find on dates or someone we meet and they're like, you date to talk with this individual, right? Maybe for a month or two, and then after they're like, you know what? My parents will not approve me to be in a relationship with a trans person, right? So that is not different from this. That's not different from this. If we have our own communities really pushing aside to build relationships, but building relationship with us, right? That means they see us differently, right? We can't be something someone wants us to be. We are our authentic self, and that really threatens the world. I don't know how, but it does threaten the world in so many different ways. But coming back to what was out on the table here, it was about the 2024 anti-gun.
Is that we started talking about the Amendment Act, like you mentioned, in the Education Act. So I'm sure many of you know about Bill 27 and Bill 29 that's currently it starts September 1st. So I had shared with them, the reason I grabbed this one is because I'm currently required to build policy around using masks. That's what I have to do this entire summer. And we just discussed really how profound the impact is obviously on the transgender community, non-binary community, but also all other communities, because those children now are going to have to change relationship with each other within the building and with their teachers, support staff, because they fear, potentially being outed or they're in essence just taking report that their child is a female. That's the only requirement, is that to play sport, I myself as a mother have to indicate that if my child wants to play on a volleyball team, a female volleyball team, I have to indicate that my child is actually a female. And if anyone challenges me, I have to produce documentation, that medical documentation, not just birth certificate, indicating that the child is actually female, which is horrible. But I find it so interesting that people are just so appalled by that, and they almost forget about the other, which basically is the start of the essence and the crux of the whole problem, is to dismantle the beginning transgender and non-binary behavior. But they only focus on that aspect, that we're going to have the average family angry with us because we have to indicate that their daughter is female. So, yeah, we just kind of talked about that and how we can support. My role is to support staff. And I was sharing with them that 99.9% of the educators in Alberta are completely contrary to this amendment. And so now that we have to support not only the students, but we have to support the families, and we have to support the staff who work with these individuals. How are we going to do that while they're all in the middle of this cacophony of disaster?
Anyone else that has sure?
We did also echo that it is a human rights issue, right? Humanity, right? Okay.
So they can't hear me. It's okay. Sorry,
Okay.
interrupting.
Like, it is a human rights issue, right? Also, students, if you cannot really learn in fear, and that is what is happening here. And what that also takes a toll on a trans youth, right? In different various ways, right? Those who are outside of that experience do not really seem to understand it. But being outed, or a trans youth being outed, it's like you are literally murdering me. We remember every year 400 plus trans people who are being unalived, right? Who are being murdered by our own families, by our own relatives, by police, by people who are very transphobes, by all these entities of sectors. So just that piece influences people who unlike trans people to continue doing the same, right? It takes away the right of a child, of a youth, to study peacefully, safely. Me being myself does not take away from anything from anyone. A trans youth being a trans youth does not take away anything from anyone. And the government still we have high levels of houselessness happening. But it took them time to pass bills like this, right? We have so many people who are unemployed, but they go ahead and target the marginalized individuals. Why do they target the trans people? That is the question we need to all answer. Why are they targeting the trans people? Why is it during the liberation, it is still the trans women who stood up? It is now still the trans people who are fighting, and we are called dividers. We are being named, we are dividing the community, we are aggressors. Like, it's still the team, and yet organizations receive funding because of the trans people.
Okay, so what my thing was that the provincial government has like a Republican with great family values type thing, and so they prefer not to acknowledge the fact that there's new dynamics happening with, an accepting of people variances than what there used to be female, male, and that's all they know. So they're kind of choosing ignorance. That's why the more education I think we can bring about this topic at every level, everywhere, all the time, as often as possible, anyway, without overdoing it. But anyway, it can only help. And even like you were talking before about your parents maybe not accepting, a relationship with transgender or something. Well, you know what? And unfortunately, we can't expect everyone to understand. That's why education is the only thing we can offer for them to try to understand and be a little bit more open-minded. That's my opinion.
Well, we'll kind of naturally transition to this table. So does anyone else feel called to speak here?
Yeah. We also picked up the 2024
work within the schools as well. But we work within Edmonton, St. Albert, Sherwood Park, the different districts. But a big issue that, like, as an agency, we're inclusive and we provide safe spaces for non-binary and trans youth, but we're coming into schools, specifically some like Catholic schools that aren't inclusive. So we're in this space where we're providing a safe space and inclusive space for these kids and youth, but we're taking them into schools that might not be in that inclusive space. So it's kind of, as an agency, how do we navigate that? How do we come into a space that doesn't necessarily align with our values, but we're trying to create a space for the kids and youth that are there that need the space. But then at the same time, you're working as an agency with partners and trying to maintain partnerships, but also following these acts and these laws that they're trying to implement. So what we chatted about was just kind of, where do you have that fine line of where you stand? How do you support these kids while also trying to educate them at the same time if they do have questions about gender and sexual expression and sexual identity, but again, you're in a space that isn't allowing for them to have that conversation from the bigger school district. And then again, but we're trying to be in there to support these kids. So it's like, not only that, the safety for our kids and our youth, but the safety of our staff, if they're coming into these spaces that aren't inclusive, or you're having people that are telling you that you can't be educating these kids, you can't be talking about these things. But as an agency, we do talk about these things because that's important. It's important to us that we are asking what your pronouns are. How do you identify? It's in our application. It's the first thing we ask when we have talking to our volunteers, our youth, our children. How do you identify? That's how I'm going to talk to you about. But then I don't want to take you into a space that doesn't allow you to express yourself. But then it's just kind of like a fine line of deciding where to be, and like, how do we maintain that? How do we move in without not demonizing, but villainizing another group of people that isn't allowing us to be who we need to be. So that's kind of like what we chatted about specifically with this as well. It's like, yeah, we ask for pronouns, we ask how you identify, but then saying, but just be careful, because these people that we're taking you into might not allow that or have that conversation with us. And then we're trying, again, maintaining relationships with partners while also standing on our ground. Kind of like where we're at.
So how would you respond to that, being as a representative of Catholic services?
I can only speak for our division. We don't do that. We honor the fact that you're your own entity, and we have our our laws that we have to, these acts that we have to follow, and we try to comply as best we can without being non-compliant. But so in our division, when you said that, I was like, oh, I hope that's not one of our schools, because that's not the message we send to our administrators and to our teachers. In fact, I don't think they would align with us if we did. But from what I understand, legally speaking, if you're an entity working within the school, you're allowed to function within your own policies and regulations, because you're really just utilizing space. You're not actually going in to teach children in the classroom setting, right? If you go in to teach, then this act will definitely come into play, because now the government has to vet you before you go in to talk about those conversations in the classroom with the teacher. But up until now, up until September 1st, it wouldn't necessarily be a mismatch.
Like the example that we recently encountered was a teen we had a non-binary teen volunteer that was questioned by their mentee about why they were using different pronouns and were using a different name. The conversation came up. Our coordinator spoke with the little and just explained that some people just that's okay, and like some people don't identify within the binary and they use different names, and that's okay. It led up to the school liaisons, and then it became an issue where they said that we were not allowed to have that conversation with the kid. So
In your space.
Well, the space is in the school.
In the school.
In the school.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so we're working within the school, so that again, it's it's an education piece too, where as an agency, it's like, if a child is asking me these questions, it's better for us to not just brush it under the rug and be like, oh, don't worry about it. But we feel like it's a responsibility to also educate the kids, especially if we're doing school-based programming. But then again, then the school decides, oh, that's not what, you're not allowed to talk about these things.
And you know what, it's not, to be honest with you, it's not a ideological response, it's more of a, again, legalities, because teachers are only allowed to teach what's in the curriculum, and we're not allowed to bring in our own bias, right, or our own ideology, although it's reamed with ideology. That's a different story altogether. But, so yeah, in that case, yes, it's true, because what happens is that's connected to sexuality, and the curriculum only allows you to speak to, and this is Catholic or non-Catholic, sexuality at certain ages, with certain topics. So that might be why they said to you, you can't have that conversation, because no one in the school is allowed to, because anytime you speak about sexuality or anything related to it, parents have to know, and they have to sign a form saying that they're okay with that conversation, regardless of whether it's that topic or just, this is my body, these are my parts.
Yeah. We kind of have an opt-in system now. Sorry, I know there's comments. I want to make sure this table has a chance, and hopefully we can come back to that at the end. So this table, do you have anything you want to share?
So, kind of talking about like story, and then specifically history, like we all kind of pulled things regarding, like I think history that maybe is not always well known. We don't always, like you almost need to go looking to learn about these things unless you've kind of been living it, and how the way that the history maybe is suppressed, we try to hide certain things. Like I grabbed this about the attempt to purge queer and trans people from government work and military, police, etc. And how all of that, ties into like the fruit machine and all of that stuff. Which if you haven't heard of that, you should look it up. But that's something that gets suppressed. We don't talk about it, and then we want to talk about how good Canada is, how we legalize same-sex marriage faster than the States, and We want to present as this positive entity, but then we don't want to talk about the true history of persecution and things that happen. And so that's kind of one of our big through lines about our conversation here. Am I missing?
Yeah, nailed it. That's exactly.
Yeah, and then we also connected it directly to this is a table I think of a lot of social work folks over here. So kind of pertaining specifically to social work and nonprofit and how not acknowledging or knowing or sharing history and the stories of what has happened, how that impacts the work that we're able to do.
So I moved to this country in 2010 from the Philippines, where most education has been privatized. You need to pay in order to have a decent education. And that's why a lot of people had to migrate out of the country. That's also why I had to move here. Because there was a certain point my parents said, we can't afford that anymore, just move to Canada, where it's public education is good at the time. Now, where I went was actually an all-girls Catholic school at the time. It literally said word forward in the rule book, no girl-to-girl relationships. Do we think that stopped people from exploring? Do we think that stopped you? People build social credibility in the sense that if they can serenade whoever they like in the high school building without the teachers looking, you get props. It's in whether you're queer or not, it's someone folding a love letter in a heart and then passing it until it gets to the other side of the classroom. And then everyone watches for the reaction as to how they respond. I think that in our schools and for these youth, they deserve to be children, they deserve to be kids. What does that mean? The same way that they talk about they deserve the chance to explore their hobbies, whether that be sports, is it language, is it band. They deserve the right to explore their identities. Where I came from in that school, there were people that were also exploring their identities. They were like, maybe I'm bi, maybe I'm not. And then after that, whether they decide they are or they're not, they figured out that, hey, I got a chance to explore it. Next thing you know, they're showing up in solidarity because In Manila, they just held the Stonewall rally like yesterday, the day before that. I think in the context of our province in our city, you know, and like with Migrantes, when we were talking about campaigns, that one of them is the Education for All. If you want to hear more about that, feel free to hit me up later. But for these kids that have lost access to school because their parents have gone undocumented, not only are they thinking about that, they're thinking, hey, if I decide to explore my sexuality, I can't really do that because of this new bill. And I think the bigger question we need to ask too is, and I like to throw this question at people who like might not know much about it or against it, is why are these people wasting taxpayer money? Why are they wasting taxpayer money doing all this? What are they actually distracting us from?
Exactly.
What? From the fact that they are privatizing education, they are privatizing healthcare. Who accesses education and healthcare? Is it not queer and trans people? Is it not also straight people? Is it not the migrant youth that is saying at home, I am not gay, I believe in God, I believe in X, Y, Z, but then they go to school, they look around a little bit. Then they hear about this bill and like, okay, maybe I'm not gay, I can't be gay. It's about the kid that can't come out at home because of their housing, because of access to food, and say, I can't be gay because I need my housing, I need my community. If I say I'm gay, it means that I'm gonna lose all of that and I'll be on the streets. So I think it's for the ones that are queer and trans, but also like let these be kids, you know, like let them have access to education. And also, why is our taxpayer money going there when it should be going towards actually serving the people? So I think that's like an important point, I guess, like that's been brought up like in other spaces I've been in. So thanks for listening.
I think that's something that we've talked a little bit about, especially when we've talked about like the importance of comprehensive sexuality education specifically, and how much trans people threat power because they exist outside of the binary that power is created in, that existing forms of power created in, right? It's, I don't know how to put this, it's like the foundational piece is that binary, and that's where all sorts of like power structures are built from. And so when you limit people's access to education, you limit all these sorts of things like from them. I really want us to focus, kind of lead on those pieces. And the way I want to kind of just briefly connect it to what we did earlier today is like we listed all of these different services, right? That are supposed to be accessible to trans, to non-binary, to queer, to gender diverse people. But how do we know, right? Some of these are very explicit. How does a person who is looking for a service, who needs help, how do they know this is actually safe for them, right? So I just kind of want to maybe look at the services that we have here today. Think about like that piece of like, how do we actually know that it's safe? How do we create that piece that let people know that it's safe?